So, diving back into the world of female directed film and documentaries, I saw a film today that I could not wait to see. The trailer just totally blew me away. This is Boom for Real, the late teenage years of Jean-Michel Basquiat. Now, going in, the trailer makes it seem that it is mostly about these late years, 18 to 20 or so for Basquiat. What it actually is a really elaborate look at the late 70s, early 80s, like 78 to 80, um, Lower East Side downtown art scene, and the way in which all of these artists found themselves um, fighting for a space in the art world and reflecting their reality in this very crime ridden era in New York City's history, and how all of what came before them and all of what would come after all sort of percolated in this one moment with punk and new wave and graffiti art and hip hop and these artists and all of that into this one big moment. And I really enjoyed it because I've seen, I've read a bit about Basquiat. I've seen some things. I still haven't seen Radiant Child. I need to find that one. A couple years ago, I saw the Basquiat Notebooks exhibit, which was eye-opening into the kind of mind he had. I've read the kids' book he did with Maya Angelou. Like, there's a lot out there about Basquiat. And so what I found so refreshing was that in telling his story, it also told the story of an era. And by interviewing all of the people they interviewed, even though they were kind of talking about him, they were really talking about the era and what it was like to be in that era with him in the periphery. And I thought that was a really great way to tell a story. So this included people like Jim Jarmusch, obviously. This was directed by Sara Driver. Sara Driver worked on a lot of, if not all of, Jim Jarmusch's films. They have been together forever. They're artistic and life partners. But obviously, they were also members of this underground art scene. It also had Patricia Field, who I knew as a costumer for things like The Devil Wears Prada and Sex and the City. What I did not know was that she started out as sort of similar to Vivienne Westwood in having a sort of a punk fashion shop in amongst the punks. And I was like, I'd never heard her talk before, and I'm like even more fascinated by her. There was Jennifer Jazz, there was Glenn O'Brien, there was Lee Quinones. I'm going to say that name wrong. I'm sorry. There was Sir Rodney Sir. There was Luke Sante. There was Al Alder. There was all kinds of people who are so well known now, and some of whom weren't so well known. And I liked that it was a really great mixture of people who are recognizable in the art world now, and a lot of people who have gone on and done other things with their lives, but were part of this in their early part of their lives. Shows you how you can be of a moment and then find something else for your life. I think that's fascinating. I really particularly liked the interviews with Fab Five Freddy. I thought he had so many interesting things to say about the era, about all of this different art and thought and history, and how he saw it all come together and what he thought it all meant, and I just found that really fascinating. The film also, other than these talking heads, there's also footage of Basquiat doing his art. There are photographs. There's some things that have never been seen before edited into this. There's some of it is shot to mirror the 16 millimeter lo-fi video artists of the era. I really enjoyed that. And a beautiful, amazing soundtrack that is not listed on IMDb, and I'm so mad because I want the soundtrack. Amazing use of Dream Baby Dream at the end of the film. Always good when you've got that piece of music. It made me really inspired, both in seeing all the work these artists were doing and in hearing the people talk about what it was like at that era. It made me want to create art again. It made me remember what it was like when I was 20 and I was making art all the time, and I didn't share it with anybody, but I made a lot of art because when you're that age, you feel everything so much and you just want to get it all out of you. And I'm always inspired by people who manage to get it out of them and share it. That's a feat. and then it ends right as he sells his first painting, and then the rest is really what's really well known about him once he's famous in the art world. But what I particularly liked was when they were talking and setting the scene, both in the art, sort of art installations, art collectives, art, etc. They also talked about the two main clubs that were frequented by the people in this scene, and then it got into talking about the way in which these artists were using. A lot of them were using heroin. A lot of the scene was full of people doing heroin, and you could hear the way these people were talking about those who took heroin, etc., etc. That you feel the sadness they have for the loss of their friend, who obviously famously died of an overdose of heroin, and how perhaps they saw this happening to so many other people, and they pivoted one way, and unfortunately Basquiat pivoted the other way once he hit fame. It also sort of, this is pre-Reaganism and pre sort of yuppie 80s, right? And a lot of these artists were creating art just to create because they had things to express. Several of the graffiti artists talked about how they had no canvas, and so the trains became the canvas. And then every time you hear people talk about Basquiat, he was an artist and he had things to say, but he also had that ambition and knew that he wanted to be rich and famous, and did a lot of things in order to get his talent in the right place for the right people to become famous in a way that some of these others didn't necessarily have as their reason for being. So that was kind of fascinating. There was a lot of sort of foreshadowing of where the 80s would go once that hunger took over everybody. So I really liked this. It's a brisk 78 minutes. I was inspired from start to finish. I know that some reviewers were peeved that there wasn't enough Basquiat, since Basquiat is the name on here, but I'm okay with that. I don't care if the title doesn't quite reflect the content. Like, that's whatever. I just really enjoyed it, and I want to go back in time and see some of these art exhibits and maybe make a zine. Oh, that was another part I really liked, where they talked about the rise of how Xerox basically helped create both the zine movement and the club poster movement and the rock show art poster movement, because the color Xerox was so good. And I'm like, oh man, I wish I was making a zine. I always wanted to make a zine. Let me know if you want to make a zine. We'll make a zine. So anyways, this is The Boom for Real, the late teenage years of Jean-Michel Basquiat. It's not a documentary for people who want to learn the biography of Basquiat. That's not the point of this documentary. It is a documentary for people who are interested in New York history, and particularly this era in New York history. I really enjoyed it. It's Magnolia, so it's playing in a lot of landmark theaters right now. Played a bunch of festivals last year. If you can find it, definitely check it out.